Hey there, CS360 students. So this is the first recording for Chapter 4, and the focus on this recording is going to be talking about fragments in Android. So first thing is that a fragment is an object that controls part of a UI on behalf of an activity. What we want to do is we want to separate out the display with the functionality. So we've been writing our functionality in the activity with it also containing the UI, but now we're going to separate out the fragment so that way we can make it more reusable. Or as you can see here, where we might have a fragment that shows a list and then a fragment that shows the details. If we have a tablet device, or if we rotate the screen, we might be able to display both the list and the details side by side. So fragments make this possible. So a couple details here. So we're going to have a class that's going to be a fragment. We will extend the fragment class. And very similar to activities, they're going to have also on create methods. So some of this will be very familiar to you as we get inside the code. In addition to the similarity in the on create, they also get created in XMLs. So here's the main activities XML. We're familiar with that. And then the fragment XML, again, very similar. We've dealt with this in the previous chapters. So to create a fragment in code, Android uses what's called a fragment manager. And we can get the fragment manager or the get support fragment manager. Those are methods that are available to the activity class. And then typically what we do is we get our fragment, we create it, and then we are going to end up adding it to the fragment manager. The reason we do this is we want to only create it one time typically. And so this fragment manager lets us add, remove, replace fragments at any time. It lets us handle navigation between the different activities, different fragments of our app. So if you hit the back arrow button, the fragment manager takes care of loading the previous fragment and so forth. So let's jump over to section 2. And in section 2, we're going to create an app that has 2 fragments. In addition to the 2 fragments, they also are each contained in their own activity. So you can see in the first fragment, it has a list of bands, and then over on the second page, we can see the details about the particular band. So each of these are a fragment in their own activity. So they do have some great details to walk you through creating this project. I encourage you to walk through and actually create this project. And then let's scroll down. Let's actually just do this. Let's go ahead and jump into the code. So I've already gone ahead and copied and pasted all the code in a project. So let's start off here. We have a band class that has an ID, a name, and a description. You can see that it has public methods to get the ID, get the name, get the description, and then there are setters that are never actually used. So really in the big scheme of things, we should probably delete out these code methods that are not utilized. And then it also has a constructor that creates it with its ID, name, and description. There is a database class that's going to contain a list of all of the bands. And this is using what's called the singleton pattern, where we have a private static member variable. So this member variable is called band database. And then we provide access to get that reference through a public static method. So we call this get instance. We pass it the context. A typical pattern in a singleton is check if our instance variable is null. And if that's the case, then it gets newed up. Otherwise, we just simply return the instance. Typically, what I do in my code is instead of calling it like band database, I would actually call it instance, which makes sense because this method's going to return an instance. One other thing that you need to do in a singleton pattern is to define a private constructor. We want all usage to go through this getInstance method, so the constructor is declared as a private method. And you can see here it news up the bands list, and then it has the context, so it gets the resources from the context. And then we create an array of the bands. We're going to read in the strings. They're all in the string called bands. So you can see here are the bands, and then here are their descriptions. So we read in those two details, and then we go ahead and create instances of the band objects right here. We have a method to get the bands. We also have a method to get a single band based on the ID. And take note that these are just public methods. These are not static. So what you would have to do is you'd have to go through the getInstance method. You get the instance, and then you can get the bands, or you can get a band. It should be noted that this method, which is pretty typical, if we don't have a match, we're going to return a null. So that would be something you have to check for on the other side when you use it. Okay, so as mentioned, we have two fragments. One is a list fragment, and so you can see that it extends fragment, and the XML looks like this. It has a linear layout. And what we're going to do with this is on create, we're going to get the view, we're going to create the layout for it, and then as this is created, we're going to get the list of bands, again, going through the band database. So you have to use the name of the class, .getInstance, and getContext is a method of a fragment. So this gets the context, which is needed for the band database. We need the context in order to get the resources. So we have the band list right here. So right there, we do the get bands call. And now we're looping through them, and we're creating a button for each of these band objects. So we create our button, and then you can see that we add a on-click listener to it. And the on-click listener right here, we're going to create an intent with this particular activity, and we're going to start our activity. So we loop through all the bands. Each one gets a button created, and then each of them will have their own listener, as you see right here. So then we go into the list activity, and in here you can see that on its on create that we create the activity list view. We get a reference to the fragment manager, and then we find this fragment, the list fragment, by ID. So again, remember the idea is the UI has been kind of separated from the activity here. And so we get the fragment, and then right here we check if it's null. If that's the case, then we create a new version of it, and then we add it to the fragment manager. So if we have created it before, it will not be null, and so it will already exist, so we will not be duplicating the effort on that. So typically we have a reference to the fragment, and we check if it's already existing. The details fragment is right here. So on its on create, we get the first band. So we're going to default to the first band, ID 1. In fact, I would probably, in the get band method, maybe I would make it where it just returns that as the default, but that's okay. In its on create view, so we create the view for this fragment, and then it has a text view, and then we're going to get the name, and then we're going to get the description, and those are going to get displayed in that particular view. Likewise, in the activity, just like the list activity, we create the fragment. So we get it from the fragment manager. So if it already exists, great, we've got it. Otherwise, it gets newed up. and it gets added to the fragment manager. So if we run this, we should have the functionality. So in our activity, here we go. So in the list fragment, we have the button click listeners. So when I click these, I should start up a new activity for a detail activity with the band information. So if I click the Beatles, we get the details about the Beatles. So we've got their name and their description. If I go back, I get the Nirvana. Oops. Let me see what my bug is there. Okay, it took me a minute or two, but I forgot, so I realized what the issue is here. So again, the as I click on other names there, if I go to my details fragment, the band right here is always the first band. So we need to write some code to handle passing data so that way we can get the appropriate band information. And we take care of that in the next section. So let's take a look at the next section. So in here, here's how we interact with fragments. So if we want to pass information between them, what we're going to do is use a fragment argument or a key value pair placed in a bundle. So just like our intents, we're going to handle passing data as a key value pair. So they provide us the details here. So we're going to update our onClick method. So in the list fragment, we're going to get the ID of the band. So that's in our list fragment. So let's go add that. So list fragment, I believe that was in the on create. Oh, sorry, that was on the on click. Let's make this so that we can see both of them at the same time. So in the on click listener right here, so we want to get the ID of the band. We need to have an intent. I need to just move this. So this will get the band ID. So we're going to use the views tag. And in details activity, we're going to set this constant here in a second. But now we've got the band ID and we are adding it as an extra, a key value pair for this activity. So let's go to the details activity. And you can see that we are adding this key that we can reference in both locations. So if I go back, that's now cleaned up. And inside, we are going to get the band ID inside after we check if the fragment is null. So we're going to do this. So if our fragment exists, we're going to get the band ID. You can see that it's going to default to a 1. And then we're going to create an instance of the fragment. So before we had it where it was newing it up, but now we're going to create a new instance using a new constructor. So let's jump down here. So the details fragment right here has this new instance constructor method. And so I'm going to paste that in here. And so while it's not really a constructor, what it's doing though is it is creating an instance of a details fragment. This is behaving just like a constructor. I give it the band ID. I create the instance of the fragment. And then inside the args, we're going to put the key band ID, and then we have the ID that we want to add. So then we can set those to the fragment, and then this returns our fragment. Keep in mind that this is a public static method, so it has to be referenced on the details fragment class. So now if I go back to details activity. Now, new instance is no longer complaining because it now knows about it. It returns a details fragment back. Okay, also in the on create, we're going to modify that. So in the on create, we are going to have our band ID. And if there are no arguments, excuse me, if there are arguments, then we're going to go ahead and get the key that's associated with the fragment. And then right here, we're going to save off this band value right here. Okay, so now if we run this, when we click on the other band names, we should now get their details, and there it is. Awesome. So if I do that one, great. So we are getting all of them as we select them. So again, nice, simple way to pass data between the fragments. Okay, next section that we're going to look at is fragment and activity interaction. And what we're going to do is use what's called the observer pattern to know when the fragment or the activity have changes that they need to know about. So observer pattern is very often used in UI work. And what you have is you have a subject that has information. And then we have observers that are interested in the information that the subject contains. And the observer wants to be notified anytime the subject has an update. And if that's the case, then the subject sends down the update to the observer. Typically, this is called a callback pattern. So again, it has three parts. The observer tells the subject, hey, keep me apprised of anything that occurs that's new. And then the subject notifies the observer, hey, I have new information. And then if the observer no longer wishes to be notified, they tell the subject to quit calling them in the callback. So we're going to implement this pattern in our list fragment. So again, let's get this so we can have both of them visible. So in the list fragment, what we're going to do is add an interface that others can call to be updated. So this is an interface, and it implements this method right here on band selected. So this is going to be the callback method that we go through. We are going to have a reference to the activity. And then we have to add the onAttach, onDetach methods. And we have to add our imports. And then lastly, we're going to update our on-click listener. So let's check what we have here. So we have the band ID, and then what we're going to do is instead of starting up the activity, we're going to comment that out. I'm going to comment out the intent. So now what we're going to do is we have a listener, and we are going to make their callback. And that is right here. So this will make a callback to our listener. So then in the list activity, we are going to override the on band selected method. So I'm going to copy and paste that in here. And that's part of the interface on band selected listener. So we need to implement that here as well. And we have some imports to take care of. All right, so again, let's talk about this pattern here. So we have an interface that defines a method that's going to be used as the callback. We have a reference to who we make the callback to. And then in the onAttach method, we have a assignment to that listener. If we don't get one, then we throw a runtime exception that there has to be a listener. When we make our selection, we get the ID, and then we go through our listener's callback, providing them the information of the update. So over in list activity, we implemented the listener, and then right here, this is the method that we're going to go through. We're going to grab the intent. We're going to then start up this activity. So we should have the same functionality, but now we are using a callback to get the information. So now I still have the same functionality, but I want to show you how that callback works. So let me do this. Let me put a breakpoint right here. So when we click, this is then going to go through that on band selected method, and we will be over in the list activity. So let's run it with debugging. That'll take a second. And so if I choose Nirvana, so here we have the band ID. So let's step over. Let me bring up my tools. So step over, I've got the debug tab selected there. So step over, so I have the band ID. It is 2. That was added as a tag. And now I'm going to do a step into. This is going to go into this callback method. And so you can see we are over in the list activity, and we know that the band ID is 2. So we're going to add that to the intent as a key value pair. And then I'm going to hit the green continue. And so now we have started up the activity here, and we have the information. Okay, next thing to look at is the recycler view. So let's suppose that we had more than just the 3 bands, and we had a quite rather lengthy list of bands to choose from. A recycler view is used to display as many as we can on the screen, but what happens is we are prepping the next resource, so that way when we slide up, band 1, that resource is removed. And this is a memory efficient way of being able to scroll through these items. And so I'm not going to implement this, but I am going to leave this to you to implement on your own. This would be great to do for your own term project. But you do need to have a dependency for recycler view in the build.gradle. And then you add the fragment list. You create a list item band. So it would have the text view, which is going to be the name of the band. And then you also have layout managers for these. So you update the code. We're going to have a class called a band holder. Remember I said this would prep the next one that it's going to display, and this would go either direction. And so we're going to have a band holder right here that's going to hold the information for the next component. Back up here in the onCreate view, the recycler view has an adapter that gets added to it, and typically this adapter is going to be the list of information that's going to be toggled through. And then that adapter is defined down here. Again, it has a list of the items, and then there's always an on create view, an on bind, and then a get item count. So pretty simple to actually hook up. I'm going to leave this to you. And again, you could scroll through, and as it moves through, it uses resources as needed. Okay, last thing, again, I'm not going to implement this on this recording, but this would be great that if you were running on a tablet, you could have the fragment of the bands on the left, and then you could have the details on the right. And so they walk you through how you could have separate layouts based on the device and the device size. And then you're going to have two fragments for a tablet. So you're going to have two frame layouts in this layout. And then what's going to be different is in list activity, we're going to check to see if we have this details fragment container. So if we have it, then we're running on a phone. Otherwise, we are running on a tablet, and you can see that they are creating it up as a tablet there. They then provide the layout values that you would need to use, and then in the on create for the details activity, you would have to check to see if you have two panes, then you're going to handle that case. And then same thing with the list activity. Keep in mind as you rotate the device, you have two different views that you have to maintain state for. So that's what this code right here is all taking care of, making sure that the state is handled. Again, since our main emphasis is going to be on a phone device for your term projects, I'm leaving this to you if you want to implement that functionality. Okay, that's going to be it for this recording.